Well, hello again. Welcome to number 5 in our wonderful look at what is an entrepreneur. And this week, this time together, I want to look at something that people don't really like to look at usually. This is, what do you do about failure? So don't get discouraged, but this one is all about failure. So first of all, what I want us to do is just to have a look quickly at where our journey will take us. And I'm assuming that you can read, so I'm not going to read them all out. I'll let you just read it. So here we go. Where are we going on our journey? And then what is it that we have actually done, and where are we going today? That's what we've done. And the need to deal with failure. I like this one by Nelson Mandela. He says, "Do not judge me by my success. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up." Isn't that great? My grandmother used to say, and I've probably got this somewhere in our script today, he who never made a failure never made anything at all. I've got some as well from an American president, just so that you can read this one as well. I think some of this stuff is really interesting. The trouble is that oftentimes we only see people at the end of the journey where they're successful, and we say, I want to be like that. And we don't realize that that's a process and a journey, and people have been on. And Lincoln was one of these people that had so many failures. Here you are. Look at some of the failures that Lincoln went through, his famous failures, right the way through, and all the dates. Have a look at that quickly. Abraham Lincoln had a nice saying. He said, the best way to predict the future is to create it. But that is after a background of all that list of failures that you've just had a look at. I've often said, are we dealing with a battle in the war or the whole war? Sometimes you can lose a battle and win the war. Sometimes we see a loss in certain situations as the really awful thing, but in fact it's not. It's just one part of a big story. So ask yourself the question, if you're facing failure at the moment, is this the whole war, or is this just one part of a failure in a process? So is it the whole war or just a battle? The problem is that some people lose a comparatively small battle in the whole war of life and see it as the end of the world. And that simply is a desperate lie. It's not true. But sometimes we find it difficult to get back up. But just remember what Nelson Mandela said. Don't count how many times I've been successful, count how many times I fell down and got back up. I like this guy in some ways. Henry Ford, I'm sure you know, he built the biggest motor company manufacturing ever. But what many people don't know is that Henry Ford failed a couple of times before he got the company off the ground. So he was not a stranger to failure. But when you think about Ford, you think about the success and you think about the end of the story. Oftentimes people look at me and say, I wish I'd got what you've got. I said, but you don't know where I have been. I have a friend who actually died recently, but I remember somebody asking him one day, how come you got to speak at the Royal Albert Hall? And he was always a long-winded storyteller, and he started by saying, well, I used to clean this little hall and I used to dust everywhere, get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and clean it all, and And the guy who I was listening to the conversation, the guy said, no, I wanted to know how you got to speak at the right. He said, oh, I was just telling you that. The problem is that we see people in a certain position and we do not know the backstory of how they got there. So Henry Ford, he tried very, very hard to actually succeed, and the first couple of times he failed. In fact, I did hear another story about a guy who was an accountant for Henry Ford who went to the banker and said, should I invest into this company? And the banker said, we're lending them some money to start it off, but actually it'll be a failure, don't invest. Fortunately, the accountant didn't listen to the banker. He invested and became a very, very rich man. So sometimes people can already have you as a failure, and actually it's just one step on the direction of where you're going. Somebody said to Edison, was it terrible to fail in your invention of the light bulb? And he said, no, I had many pointers on the way to success. It's how we see failure, isn't it? The other thing I've always liked about Henry Ford, once I had a big discussion with somebody who said that we shouldn't do things for people unless they actually want it. The problem is that sometimes people don't know what they want. And Henry Ford, again, has got another quote on that one. He said, if I'd have asked people, what is it you want? They would have said, faster horses. But he said, I'm building cars. Why would I ask them? Because they don't know what a car does. Okay, so our agenda is it the whole war or just a battle? Evaluate failure realistically. Why did this fail? Why did I fail? Why did I not succeed? Don't beat yourself up on it, but ask the questions, why did it fail and can it do better? I like this one from Jack Sparrow in his little films. The problem is not the problem is your attitude about the problem. Do you understand? That's a whole load of things, isn't it? I heard this years and years ago about ants. There's a little passage in the Bible that says, go to the ant. And so this guy said, I've gone to ants and looked at all sorts of things that they do. What do they do? Well, apparently, if you... I've never tested this and I'm not an ant, but apparently if you stand on an ant and it's still alive after you've stood on it, the first thing it does after that is it washes its face. What it's doing really is doing something very ordinary and basic to restore its basic ant-like equilibrium. And sometimes I think it's probably a good English thing, isn't it? What we say in England is if you've got a problem and it's really going difficult, have a cup of tea. And then we also say, of course, if it's a great success, we need to have a cup of tea, perhaps a biscuit as well. Is it the whole war or is it just a battle? Evaluate realistically, look at the past, assess where you are, pick yourself up and start again. Here is, it's not mine, I wish it was, but here's 7 ways to deal with failure. Fully embrace both positive and negative emotions. So yeah, I feel a bit fed up that it's failed. Be realistically optimistic. Now, some people are not realistically optimistic. What happens is that they are, I'm going to build a new house on the moon. Well, maybe you will, maybe you won't. I have great doubts. Reject rejection. That's a hard one because rejection builds in us, and it's really a difficult thing to deal with. But take yourself above rejection. Let me tell you something. God thinks you're great. And if that's the situation, we ought to think like he thinks and not like we think about ourselves or what any other negative person has to say about us. Build strong support systems. I've got a little phrase that whenever anybody has got an entrepreneurial idea or a new idea, I say be very aware of cold water bucket people. They're the people that come along and say, that'll never work. that'll no good, you'll fail. Beware of those people. Find people who are positive thinkers, who think that you can succeed, who are encouraging, not unrealistically, but realistically. Another thing we need to do, we need to seek out opportunities for growth and learning. So sometimes we need to learn from our mistakes, and sometimes we need to go to other people and get their advice and if their expertise in an area, we need to take hold of that. Number six, notice and appreciate the little positive things. Another friend of mine said that we should always learn to be thankful. Sometimes we're not thankful enough. Sometimes we forget the good things. We need to rehearse things that have happened that are positive, as well as remembering the failure. Be endlessly grateful. I think sometimes we're incredibly ungrateful. In our office, my wife has a phrase, and people really get almost upset with her, because every time something goes wrong and they're groaning, she will say, "You're not in a small boat in the middle of the sea drowning. You're here. You be thankful for what you have got." Is it the whole war, or is it just a battle? Evaluate realistically, look at the past, assess where you are, and as Mandela said, get up and go. Nice little picture here of somebody shooting arrows. Somebody, you know, when we're evaluating where we're going in terms of being an entrepreneur, there was a guy, and he was a farmer, and somebody went to see him, and he'd got one of these dartboards on the side of his barn, lots of them in fact, and every one of them had got a bullseye. And the guy said, "How come you're such a good shot? Every time you shoot, you get a bullseye." No, he said, "It's not like that." He said, "What I do is I shoot and then I paint the board around where I've shot." That's not a good idea. Here's my take on failure. Is it the end of the war or just a battle? Pick yourself up, shake your head, learn from the experience, and do ask yourself, is the project right? Is there a better plan? Start again, and yet again, remember Nelson Mandela. Okay, that's my take on failure. All these are wonderful and good, but only one of these never fails. So, family sometimes fails, friends fail, college fails, church fails. God never fails. I want you to look at these pictures. Here's some famous failures. Albert Einstein, Michael Jordan, Walt Disney. Do you know Walt Disney was offered he went to be an animator, and they said he was no good at it. He hadn't got any imagination. Steve Jobs, Oprah Winfrey, the Beatles. Did you know that the Beatles went for a record deal and were told, "We don't need that sort of stuff anymore. It's out of date. Nobody's interested." That was the Beatles interview. Okay, if in failure, pick yourself up, get going again. That's our stuff on failure. We had to look at it. Thank you for being with me. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've learned something.